Okay, welcome. My name is Hana Vizcara, and I am the current president of the board for the Women's Council on Energy and the Environment, or WCEE. We are a nonprofit, policy neutral, nonpartisan organization dedicated to the professional development of women in energy and the environmental fields. And we're the hosts of this event and are really excited today to be joined by Christine Harada, who is the executive director of the Federal Permitting Council. I also want to say thank you to AE2C, the Asian Americans in Energy and Environment and Commerce, who are co-sponsoring this event with us today. So for those of you who have found us through that, thank you for joining. And before we get started with the conversation, I want to tell you a little bit about how we're going to structure this and how you can engage. We're going to spend the first part of our time together in conversation, and we'll save some time for audience questions towards the end. But please feel free to submit your questions throughout. You don't need to wait till the end to submit them. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That's how we'd prefer you to submit the questions, but if you don't see it, feel free to submit it through chat too. But just look for that Q&A button at the bottom. And with that, welcome, Christine. Thank you for joining us. We have a lot to talk about, I think, today. Before we talk about your current position at the Federal Permitting Council, I would love for you to share with our audience some more about how you got there. You've worked in government affairs for a renewable energy tech company. You've served on the board of technology firms. You were the president of an impact-driven investments firm focused on renewable energy and green development. You're an engineer, you have management consulting experience, and you've been in the federal government before. So you have a wide variety of experiences. And for those that want to read more about that, you can find Ms. Harada's bio on our registration page. But tell us a little bit more about your career path and how you got here, what got you started and brought you to public service.
Yeah, so firstly, thank you so much for having me here today. My career, especially when you read it like that on paper, it just sounds like, my half joke is when Bugs Bunny is digging a tunnel and he made a left turn in Albuquerque and now he's somewhere else that he didn't think he was. Certainly was not what I anticipated doing when I first graduated from college. It makes sense when I tell the story. But the bottom line is, I've long pursued my career based on mission. Like I really need meaning in order to be able to commit to the agency or the organization, the entity. I have a habit of working hard, and so if I'm going to work hard, I really want to enjoy doing what I'm doing and the people that I'm doing it with. And so with respect to my career, so to your point, I certainly have all those very different things, 10 years in management consulting. I also actually started out my career building satellites. I was an aerospace engineer. I'm an ABD in aerospace engineering. I just never found a topic that I really wanted to focus so many years of my life on. But um, a lot of my work really stems from that kind of discipline, and the way that we were taught was to very much think in a systems kind of way. I went to MIT undergrad, and in aerospace engineering was taught via unified engineering, was what they called it. And we learned all the topics all at once, and it was integrated, at the event, both along the way, but certainly at the very end, to show how those various disciplines integrate together. And so subsequently, I found that I end up doing that quite a bit, whether that be out of habit or out of comfort, or it's just a natural way of thinking for me now. Over the last number of years, I've of course become a lot more passionate about climate. A lot of the things related to the climate field are a great integration and marriage of all the things that I've done. There are a number of really great technical solutions that are out there, and so I'm appreciative of my engineering background to be able to dive into those kinds of details. Certainly, there's a big business implication because if it's not affordable or accessible, people just aren't going to do it. So, how do we help affect climate change solutions? In a realistic manner, progressing that. Management consulting, a lot of that is around, how do companies, Fortune 100 companies, in my case, deliver on their promises, right? What strategy should they adopt? How should they organize behind that particular strategy? How do they execute? Because if you don't execute, it doesn't mean anything. And so again, it's just very much an amalgamation of everything that I've done. I was very fortunate, extremely fortunate to have been able to serve in the Obama administration, first at the General Services Administration, as well as eventually as a federal chief sustainability officer in the White House. And there, of course, tremendous mission, stuff that I really, really care about, great integration of a lot of the things that I've done to date with respect to, being serving mission-oriented organizations like the federal government, for example, and bringing it all to bear to figure out how do I help bring about that change and help make it stick.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, this background, your varied background with really sort of high level engagement in a whole array of different experiences. And as you mentioned, the education that you got by, with your early on when you were considering going down the dissertation route really does teach you how to synthesize a lot of different information and look for ways forward. And it seems to me that the role that you ultimately had in the Obama administration with the sustainability role required all of that to execute. And I'm very curious to hear your perspective on sort of what that role looked like at that time. And then here, a number of years later, a new administration that is trying to push many of these topics and sustainability issues, environmental concerns, environmental justice, and climate throughout the administration and make it a priority and across the agencies. What does that role look like now? Or how different is it to have that sort of spread out accountability throughout the agencies versus what you were trying to do in that sort of federal centralized sustainability role?
Yeah, I would say so. Certainly, it was a centralized role, and I think it was very appropriately placed, at the White House and Council on Environmental Quality. But that said, it is very much still a leadership via influence role. I don't have the budget. I don't have the statutory authority. I can't make you people do the things I want you to do, type of thing. And so, a lot of my role entailed figuring out just blocking and tackling. How do these are the administration's goals. Let's get agreement on the goals and the fact that this is what we want to deliver before the end of our time. What are the things that I need that I can do to help you get there? Frequently, a lot of it was about questions surrounding some of their statutory authorities. Um, if you want to dive super deep for a moment, I like to, performance contracting. Can this agency actually leverage a performance contract in this kind of way? And so, calling up the right nerds, whether it be from the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, or the White House, or whatever the case might be, convening those folks together and really solving that particular problem. A lot of the work that I did very much, was built upon figuring out how to talk to one another. I grew up in a bilingual household. I still am actually bilingual in a Japanese household. And for better for worse, a lot of my perspectives is informed by that cultural lens and recognizing that different cultures speak different languages, even though you think you're actually using the same words. Same thing happens in engineering. Systems engineering in aerospace is very different from systems engineering in software, is very different from systems engineering in the environment, right? And so that means all different things to many different folks. And so, I have no shame in asking a lot of dumb questions and asking for folks and speaking in plain English. So when you say systems engineering, like, can you say a little bit more about what that means? I am so pleased to see how far a lot of our societies have come over in the last 5 years with respect to sustainability and climate. When we were in office, it did still feel a lot like pushing string uphill. I recognize with this audience, everybody's like, yes, it's about time. And I very much am with you on that front. And so it's exciting to see the number of private sector partners and nonprofit partners, that are very much on board with addressing climate change and the existential crisis that it is, actually admitting that it's a legit crisis. I also have, you touched briefly on my education. I was fortunate enough to go to engineering school, into business school, as well as international studies, while at the University of Pennsylvania. And so again, like bringing those different perspectives together to bear enables me to come up with a lot of harebrained ideas is what I like to half jokingly call it, but I recognize that I think differently from a lot of people. And so, especially for those moments where we need to rethink how we're doing things, I have found that that is a helpful skill set to have had. in management consulting and in engineering, candidly, we call it first principles thinking. In engineering, it's F equals MA. I'm sure in the legal realm, there's first principles thinking that I have no idea what they are. But as you are developing new laws, you think back to what are the foundational elements of legal structure and how do we think about them? Same thing with constitutional law, perhaps in the United States. And so being able to recognize when there have been assumptions made to date with respect to how things are implemented. How are the processes? Why were the processes designed this way? Why was the law designed this way? And being able to unpack each of those assumptions and get down to the absolute basics is, I think, a useful skill set to have, especially as the world is evolving ever more quickly, it seems.
I think that's an incredibly true point right there. We're trying to rethink approaches, and both as a government, as a society, in business, in advocacy world, and that sort of key of understanding what people are really saying and how differently people speak and think about the things based on their experiences and their education and their perspective that they're focusing on. I think is an incredibly key skill for someone in your position. And I like your analogy of the languages with and talking about different engineers and in the federal government. I think many people look at the federal government as one entity in a lot of ways, but really it is one of the most gigantic entities there is. Each agency has its own personality, has its own statutory authorities, as you mentioned, and its own sort of limitations and opportunities that being in a role where you have to engage with people coming from each of those perspectives, you have to be able to pull out, where the commonalities are, where the concerns are. And, it sounds like your experience in that sort of the sustainability role in the last administration as well prepared you for then engaging in a different way when you have more pieces of the government maybe directly focused on these concerns. So why don't we shift a little bit to talk about your current role. So you're the ED of the Federal Permitting Council, which is a relatively new entity. Tell us a little bit about its history, why it's there, and sort of what your role is at the organization.
Sure, absolutely. So from a legal statutory history, if you will, we were first stood up in December of 2015 under the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, which is why it's called the FAST Act.
As 41.
41, Title 41. And when I speak with project developers, they're like, "What's this FAST 41 thing? Why is it called that?" So recognizing it's very legal, technically wonky type of stuff. Same and similar conversation with environmental groups. We're like, we don't want mining projects to get permitted faster. And like, I know, I hear you. We're not called fast because we make things go faster. That's not the whole point. The whole point of our organization is to serve as a central coordinating body for permitting certain large, complicated infrastructure projects. Fundamentally, it is about facilitating good project management practices, fostering a super high level of communication and collaboration, and providing transparency to achieve a high quality, accountable, and effective project review and permitting process. The statute that we were founded under established procedures for coordinating federal environmental reviews and authorizations. It created a federal permitting council, which is comprised of 16 members, to include the deputy secretaries of 13 agencies, plus the chair of CEQ and the director of OMB, as well as myself. Together we help hash through policy issues that may be hampering agencies with respect to coordinating their respective permitting timetables. One of our seminal products is the Federal Permitting Dashboard, which provides a public view of the project Gantt charts for all the projects, who's on first, what's on second, what permits does this project need to obtain, from which agencies, what's the status of that, if it ends up getting delayed, what's the rationale for it. And so our goal is to really serve as that transparency and accountability, as well as issue resolution, collaboration and coordination entity, so that we can actually build out that sustainable infrastructure that we all would very much like to see in our nation. The ideas, stemming behind the permitting council isn't all that new. It's stuff that's been done largely through presidential memoranda and executive orders since about the 2000 timeframe. Really got kicked into earnest during the Obama administration, post ARA, the American Recovery Act and Reinvestment Act. Um, spending there and ensuring that and seeing when we have a huge number of projects that need to go through environmental permitting that require all these different agencies to coordinate together. Having that kind of centralized body with that kind of governance model is extraordinarily helpful. And it's not because the federal government is incompetent at project management or anything like that, but it's much more about different agencies have different priorities. And so a lot of this is about figuring out, and speaking with the leadership at the respective agencies, like, hey, so there are these particular projects. Let's talk about how we want to prioritize, the work that we're going to be doing here.
And you mentioned the infrastructure development and sort of development in general coming out of ARA. We're in a somewhat of a similar situation now where we have the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed and a whole lot of new money coming to to fund a wide range of projects, very complex, large projects, everything from your traditional infrastructure projects to offshore wind to clean tech, renewable other types of renewable energy projects. How is that influencing the work of the council? How you're approaching this? Your dashboard, I expect, is getting longer and longer. And so what does that mean for the sort of how you function as a council?
Yeah, absolutely. In a lot of ways, I really try to, my personal mantra is always seek to add value, right? And so the way that I can maximize value add for the mission and the agencies at this time largely is around a couple of things, right? So one is serving as a convening role, indeed, hashing out some of the policies, a lot of the stuff we're learning. Offshore wind is a completely brand new burgeoning industry in this nation, right? And thank goodness for the president's very aggressive targets of 30 by 30, the 30 gigawatts by 2030. We have to jumpstart the entirety of the supply chain, the shipbuilding, the ports infrastructure investments to support that in order to get the turbines into the ground off the coast of the United States. And so a lot of it is around unpacking, like, what does it mean when we do this? What There are enough technical differences between offshore oil and gas and offshore wind that there are some legitimate science questions that get raised. And so being able to call into question, like, how do you want to think about the science? Here's the current state. What are the policies that we need to be able to make sure that we're applying so that we can both advance these projects forward as well as ensuring that we are, that we're being lawful, right, and respecting ESA, Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, all the other things that we need to be mindful of. But some of the other things that, we also try to do is do a lot more of information sharing with industry as well. A lot of project developers have not been involved in many massive infrastructure construction projects in the United States for a very long time. And so working with them to help them understand, how do you work with the federal government? To your point, we are not just one monolithic entity. We are many different agencies, many different bureaus, many different offices. And so, given the particular agency needs and candidly perhaps some of their personalities as well, like, what's the best way forward that we can do so in a much more collaborative manner. Obviously, a lot of our with climate change, a lot of the climate related technologies investments that we would like to be making, things like hydrogen hubs or carbon capture relatedly, also are newer fields that we are currently investing in, both from the DOE and the government and the research and development grant side, as well as trying to bridge the valley of death towards, real project development type of thing. And so, learning how we're going to be working together on that front. And certainly last but not least, trying to do so in a way, trying to do all this build out in a way that makes good sense from a place-based perspective. So for example, to the extent that we can just do a dig once strategy, like, hey, if you're going to dig once because you've got to lay this conduit, why don't we also lay down some pipes and help fix up the water infrastructure, and then we can pave over it, right? So upwards of 30% or maybe more of a project cost, especially if you're digging underground, is related to repaving the road. So if that's going to be the case, dig once, do all the stuff that you need to do, and get it done. In its most simplest form, it sounds incredibly easy, but it's not. And it's not largely because we have to coordinate across so many different agencies. And so that's exactly the kind of work that we're doing at the council.
So essentially the permitting council's role in that situation is coordinating the various permitting processes of the different agencies to make sure they happen at a time that allows for a dig once policy or in an individual project. We have an audience question that actually relates to some of the things you've already talked about. So I'm going to read it right now because I think it fits with this conversation. And it says FERC has a pretty transparent docket process, and other agencies like the Corps of Engineers, for example, do not. The permitting dashboard has at times or frequently had stale data. Is the council working on improving both the transparency of the process at agencies, in addition at the agencies that it works with, but also in posting more timely information on the permitting dashboard?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. We love working with FERC. FERC is FERC does a fabulous job, in my personal opinion, with respect to the transparency. Army Corps, interestingly, to your point, they actually, they don't have much in the way of a website, but they too are extraordinarily diligent with respect to updating their data. That is a good amount of effort from our team to ensure that that data is indeed up to date and is not stale. Um, Hopefully, if you take a look at the website today, it should be much more up to date. There may be one or two projects that are stale, largely because they are awaiting FERC proceedings. And so in that particular case, we defer to the agencies and their various statutory authorities and proceeding requirements and things of that nature, because we certainly don't want to post stuff ahead of them, type of thing. But there's certainly a lot of coordination going on in the background.
And you touched on this a little bit. You talked about the environmental permitting process in general and sort of the coordination role that you play. And on the one hand, that's partially in an effort to make things more efficient and move forward. NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, that oversees this structure. So some of the permitting, the environmental assessment process. Right now it's undergoing a review. The CEQ is considering new regulations. How does that impact how you're approaching this? I mean, there's the likelihood that there will be additional guidance coming from CEQ on how agencies should be approaching environmental assessments and analysis, and that will certainly have an impact on major projects as they move forward. To what extent, how does that impact the work you're doing now to try to get things moving, as well as sort of how you approach your coordination role?
Yeah. So a couple of things there. Firstly, we work very closely hand in hand with CEQ and OMB and many of the other permitting council agencies. And so all of the agencies, the good news about this administration, we're very much in lockstep. And CEQ is coordinating with each and every single one of us with respect to their rulemaking. That is very much a CEQ activity. And so, they do their work, they will share some of the output and process along the way. We are treated just like any other agency in that kind of regard. I do feel for them, though, that is a very heavy lift for them at the moment. And so from a overall work perspective, we are very cognizant of those proposed changes, and we certainly, work closely with them on how and when we're going to be implementing them. Agencies themselves are extraordinarily interested, as well, right? Because they want to make sure that they're being appropriately compliant with NEPA as they are doing a lot of this work. And so in that regard, we're all very lockstep. Relatedly, I know that there's also a tremendous amount of interest from industry and the project developer community as well with respect to the NEPA regulatory changes that are coming, both phase 1 and phase 2. And for that, though, to be candid, we refer them over to CEQ because that is where the authorities and the expertise lies.
That makes sense. I want to encourage the audience to please submit questions, whether it's about the permitting council and Christine's current role or her career path. Please feel free to just drop them in any time. I want to come back also to continue our conversation on environmental assessments. This administration has placed a significant emphasis on environmental justice and the impact on individual communities of development and projects, and just environmental harms across the board, in addition to the broader concept, issue of climate change. How does the permitting council have balanced its effort to move project forward and make sure that it is that these projects are compliant with NEPA, but also, working in the most efficient process while considering those concerns and making sure that the agencies are properly fulfilling these goals of this administration.
It's my view, personally, my hypothesis, that a lot of, if you do NEPA properly, not just from, not just from a compliance, like just a simple check the box kind of perspective, but if you actually apply the statute and a lot of the permitting requirements, to the intent, the spirit and intent, if you will, that you're actually going to end up doing a higher quality job. And the higher quality job of doing, more frequent and in-depth public stakeholder engagement of disadvantaged communities, making sure that we're doing right by the communities that we're in, that these projects are going to be going in the end actually ends up shortening the overall permitting and then eventually the construction process and the project completion date, right? My hypothesis is that there was insufficient engagement and information exchange happening up front, that eventually a lot of communities were just caught off guard, like, wait, what is this, what's going on here, like, why is this happening? And then come the lawsuits, right? And so that ends up pushing your timeframes further and further to the right. And so, I do recognize that there's, again, a very highly simplified view, of the world, but the role that we at the Permitting Council play in that is a couple of different ways. So number one, obviously we're coordinating on the policy front, working closely with those agencies that do have a funding distribution or grant distribution mission, and ensuring that as we play that forward through the permitting side of things, that we're coordinating on that front. But certainly, we have the power of the dashboard and transparency. One of the things that we're currently in the process of making an update to the dashboard itself, but I would like to see more of that type of information posted on each of the project pages. What kinds of public meetings are you guys having? When are they scheduled? And even if it's not on my website, link it to yours. It's fine, right? But so long as the public has a way of being able to find that information, whether it be through our website or through the agency's website, that's fine. Just be able to make sure that we're finding it. Um, and I do think that, transparency is one of those things where it certainly sounds good to, if you're a regular Joe public type of thing, but I think that it is, a lot of the nuances end up getting lost just in that word. It's extraordinarily powerful. The amount of work and coordination that happens behind the scenes when it comes to publishing text onto a public facing website is impressive. And that in and of itself puts a lot of pressure, in a good way, Christine's opinion, sometimes uncomfortable, frequently uncomfortable, on the agency part, to ensure that they are doing everything, correctly, above board, etc. And for the most part, they are. And I think that there are situations where, communications could indeed be enhanced. Of course, we all speak, again, different languages at different times, type of things. But that's certainly a big role that we at both the Permitting Council and the dashboard can play in that front.
Yeah, it is certainly a challenge, and it is, I think, one that will continue to evolve as these really complex projects move forward. I want to encourage folks to throw in any additional questions they have. I'm going to move out of the technical side of what the Permitting Council does a little bit to go back to your career path and your advice to women, either as they get started in energy and environment. For women who are interested in working in these fields and just getting started, are there any particular pieces of advice you would give them based on your trajectory and your history?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Number one, I'm so excited, firstly, to be working with so many women. I mean, when I first started out in aerospace engineering, my central organization had 120 people. There were 4 women. So the good news
Wow.
is there was no line for the ladies' room. Bad news is that there's only 4 of us. I was also frequently in lecture halls of like 250 plus, where I was the sole woman, kind of thing. And so it's just, as an older lady now, it's nice to see, so many women who are interested in these more technical fields. When I was in consulting, I was advised that, you want to think about your career kind of in an I shape, the letter I, that is. That you want to make sure that as you are, as you're entering into the workforce, and you've got, very, if you're of more junior tenure, if you will, that you want to make sure that you are gathering up your technical skill set and making sure that you can deliver, man, that if it's an analysis, to financial analysis, engineering analysis, whatever the point might be, make sure that you've got your technical stuff down, ensure that you've got your written, verbal, oral communications, skill set down, like get that down, because that is how people are going to pull you into the kinds of projects and work that they want to do. Say, for example, Hana is like, oh, I've got this client, like, oh, you, I need you to work on my project because, you've got excellent analytical skills. You can get to the ground truth. You can triangulate from multiple data sets and you can conglomerate that together into a